Recently, a study conducted by Arizona Christian University was published. George Barna, the university's Cultural Research Center's director, led the research. To call the results of this research striking would be a significant understatement. It's hard to come up with one single word to describe this, so we'll just get into it. Here's the summary from an article in Newsweek. It says, 30% of millennials identify as LGBTQ, according to a soon-to-be-released study that's based on scientific polling data. Among Christians, the numbers were lower, but only slightly, with just under 30% of millennial Christians identifying as LGBTQ. The portion of the population that describes itself as gay has varied over the years from 10%, based on research by Alfred Kinsey, widely promoted by the National Gay Task Force in 1977, to less than 6% in a recent Gallup poll. Now, a couple of notes about that before we look at these results more closely. You may recall from our discussion of Alfred Kinsey a couple months ago that the 10% figure was completely bogus at the time. Kinsey wanted there to be a large portion of homosexuals in the country. He wanted to create a society where heterosexuality was but one mode of sexuality among an array of equal options. And so he falsified his research to kind of get the ball rolling, so to speak. He surveyed male prostitutes, sex offenders, men in prison, carefully choosing from non-representative samples of the population, and then extrapolated all kinds of conclusions about male sexuality based on that. The prevalence of homosexuality was the least of what he falsely concluded. Now, this is relevant because it shows how there's been a very real plot, a plan. Yes, if you like, a conspiracy to fundamentally change human sexuality. It was set in motion by degenerate quacks like Alfred Kinsey and John Money, and now we're seeing the fruits of their labor. So a little more from Newsweek. It says, the poll looked at so-called millennials, defined as someone born from 1984 to 2002, about 78 million individuals representing a quarter of U.S. population. Among millennials, 30% identifies LGBTQ, more than 3 times that of the rest of the adult population. And when the researchers broke out the youngest of the group, ages 18 to 24, which is really Gen Z, they found 39% call themselves LGBTQ. Okay, so we're talking 40%, nearly 40% identifying as LGBT. Now, if this is true, if these numbers are anywhere close to accurate, then we are witnessing not even just a seismic shift in human sexuality, but a full-on transformation unlike anything the world has ever seen before. Many people, though, on both sides of the ideological divide, for different reasons, don't want to believe or admit that such a transformation is actually happening. So they have a few ways of trying to deny or mitigate results like this. On the left, they'll say that this doesn't reflect a change at all. They'll claim that there have always been this many LGBT people in society, but they just didn't feel comfortable revealing themselves until now. That's what they'll say. But this is not credible because older generations have also been surveyed. In our current day and age, where everybody is very accepting and tolerant and all of that, older generations are also surveyed, and their numbers are much, much lower. So the left's theory kind of waves a magic wand over millions of Americans and declares that, they're all closeted gays, with no evidence at all for such an assertion. Also, if we're looking at this from a purely biological and evolutionary perspective, it doesn't make any scientific sense that 40 or 50% or more of a species would be non-heterosexual. Now, the left claims that homosexuality is biological, right? Then if that's true, then a 40 or 50% figure simply could not happen for evolutionary reasons. Unless you want to argue that evolution isn't true. Keep in mind, the left loves to claim also that homosexual activity exists in the animal kingdom, right? You hear this all the time. Well, find me a species where nearly half are homosexual. That doesn't exist. It can't exist because such a species would go extinct. So this theory doesn't work. But you'll have people on the right who deny it as well. They, simply because they don't want to believe that the LGBT brainwashing of kids has really been this tremendously successful. They just don't want to believe it. It's something that they can't wrap their heads around, and so they say, no, there's no way. And they'll say the numbers here are wrong. Yet the problem for them is that these results are just the latest in a long line of research conducted both by right-leaning and left-leaning organizations, and they all come to the same sort of conclusion. Gallup, as mentioned by Newsweek, they did a major poll several months ago. They didn't find that 30 or 40% of Gen Z identify as LGBT, but they did find that 15% identified that way and another 5% had no opinion about their own sexuality. So that's 20% not identifying as heterosexual. A smaller portion, but still 10 times their parents' generation and 20 times their grandparents' generation. So whether it's 20% or 30 or 40, it's almost splitting hairs. The point is that there is a trend here, a very dramatic trend. And it's a trend, again, spanning generations, which rules out the other dismissive claim, which you still hear from some on the right, that this is all a fad, right? LGBT identification for the kids today, it's like what emo or goth was when I was a kid. But we know it's not just a fad of that sort, because you find this trend, again, spanning generations, starting with my grandparents, going all the way down to my kids' generation. LGBT identification has risen by large portions each step of the way until today. We also know that it's not just a fad, because fads, when we were kids, were treated like fads. Adults would tell you, if you were a goth, an adult would say to you, this is a fad. You're going to look back on this and be embarrassed. What they didn't say to the goth kid is, this is your truest identity. You should define yourself by your gothness. This is the most important thing about you. Here, I made you this flag. March through the street with it. Let everybody know. This is who you are and will always be. If adults had said that, then there'd still be a lot of people in my generation today walking around with dyed hair and makeup. Well, in fact, there are a lot of people in my generation walking around that way, but not because they identify as goth. And that's the point. So if this is not a fad, which it isn't, and if it is not a natural biological occurrence, which is only today finding its true expression, which it also isn't, then what's going on? Well, what's going on is social contagion, a kind of mass hysteria, a group hallucination, in effect, but one that is constructed, fabricated. Okay? This is all intentional. It is social engineering on a scale and at a level previously unknown to mankind. We've seen brainwashing before, but never like this. And never has it started so young. So this seems relevant. A video that went viral this week, like a million other videos of this type. We've got, again, very young boy, 4 years old in this case, paraded on camera in the female alter ego that his mother has imposed on him, and she's very proud of it. Let's listen to that.
To your face, Ty.
Makeup?
You put makeup on it?
Mm-hmm.
How old are you?
7.
No, how old are you?
7!
You're 4.
No, it's 7!
Are you a boy or a girl?
A girl.
A girl?
Mm-hmm.
Were you born a girl? Were you born a girl?
Yes.
When you were a baby, were you a girl?
Yes.
Are you in a boy's body, though?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, tell TikTok bye.
Bye.
Yeah, who bought him that makeup? This is his choice, right? Who bought him the little pink dress there? Quite an interesting clip. Once you can get past the visceral revulsion, you notice the incoherent, arbitrary line the mother draws. She will respect the boy's self-identification, his alleged self-identification as a girl, but not his self-identification as 7 years old. And why not? Age is more fluid and changing than sex, which doesn't change at all. Age is also relative. I mean, relative at least to what planet you're on. There are planets in the universe where that boy would actually be 7 years old. So why can't he identify as 7 then, if he wants? He says he's 7, and the mother has no problem saying, no, you're not 7. You're mistaken about how old you are because you're a little boy and you don't know, you don't understand how age works. Yet, well, she won't say that to the boy about his biological sex. And notice how the boy, who is supposedly a girl now, and you can't see this if you're just listening to the audio, but they're outside, and as he's talking about the fact that he's a girl, he's trying to climb on the wall while talking about how he's a girl. Now, climbing on walls is a boy activity. I have 2 of them. That's what they do. We have the wall smudges to prove it. So this is a boy acting like a boy in every way. It's just that he's been dressed this way by his mother. And the boy isn't old enough to sort through this incoherence, and sadly, he may never be able to see it for what it is, even when he's older, because his brain is being rewired. His entire conception of himself is being altered. His mother cannot make him a girl like she wants, but she can change him drastically and permanently. And a version of this, to some degree or another, is happening to an entire generation, as it happened to much lesser degrees to generations before them. You know, we're worried about our kids being indoctrinated into critical race theory and socialism and becoming Democrats. Well, sure, we should be worried about that. But none of that, when it comes to the indoctrination of kids, none of that comes anywhere close to this. To generations of kids being completely redefined, their identities redefined, as we all sit back and watch. Well, I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Matt Walsh Show. If you did, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right down there so you can stay up to date on all of our future content.